Welcome to Shiny Side Out with Dave and Mackie here on WZZR, broadcasting from Australia for Revolution Radio on freedomslips.com, where it's more than just radio, so jump into the chat room if you can. This is show number 414. Mackie feels left out because I didn't leave the gap for Mackie. It's Dave.
410 and 400. There you go.
It's Dave and
Mackie. No, I was muted, and I'm picking up an echo, but that's all good.
All right, thanks, Ahmad. You can turn that off now. Thanks. It's on air, online, and on your smart device. So grab an app to listen anywhere or listen at home, like I do. But I wish that I had a Grace tabletop digital radio. Damn you, Grace. If you missed Solaris' show, she actually had a really fun show. There was 3 people on, and there was a lot of witchcraft and good information, good vibes, good feeling. And did you know that Solaris is at UFO Con, Mackie, and I'm super jealous. Oh, you know, we live in Australia. I go to local UFO meetings, and they're great, yeah, but they're nothing on the size of the events that are in the US. My goodness. But if you miss Solaris' show, you know, you can just jump in the archives. And we keep saying this every single month, that it is really cost effective. You know, $5 US a month, which is a coffee or something like that, or maybe a triple coffee. I don't know what kind of coffee you like. I like the big 20-ounce coffee that just, you know, a heart starter. That's what I call it in the morning. And then when I get to work, I have another one, because that just gets me to lunchtime. And then by lunchtime, I'm still on edge, and then I have maybe like a Coke or a caffeinated drink, and that usually sees me through. I get to slide down the end of the half day, you know, slowly towards my commute home again. It's amazing. Now, do that, get in the archives, choose some other things with the station to continue the station's longevity, and that is maybe purchase something from the station. You know, there's even got a Zazzle store where you can buy merch. So check the merch out and contribute that way. Mackie and I, we live in Australia, as you might have already been able to tell from our accents. But the thing is that not Mackie and I, like, we arrived well after all of this happened, but Australia it had its own people, and they were, rather than, you know, beads and mirrors and and what are those blankets they handed out a long time ago, Mackie, those lovely blankets that were infested? None of those. They just took it and considered that the people at the time, the British colonies, considered the Australian Aboriginals as fauna, just part of the lands, like not the landscape, but the animals that lived on it. Isn't it crazy? And it wasn't, I think, 70s, Mackie, where that was changed, or even more recent. So, because of this, it has changed.
70s.
The 70s, thank you. Because of this, it has changed the way that we view the landscape since. And there's a refreshed or renewed ability, or maybe ethos, I suppose, where we thank the traditional custodians of the land, where we are when you're starting a conference or a meeting and you're officially, you know, in some capacity speaking about that land or the place you're in. And where I live, it's the Darkinjung people, and where Mackie lives, it's
The Darug people.
the Darug people. And we pay our respects to elders of the Aboriginals, past, present, and emerging. And I have to make you realize what it is that we've done to the land. And I say, let us remember that beneath our houses, all of the concrete, the roads, the buildings, everything, are lands, because they didn't construct buildings so much as we do at all. And they looked after land, just like the Native Americans did. They had some teepees, some temporary housing, and they moved around. But, you know, both countries share something amazing, and that is a complete longevity of culture in that country and stories passed down from generation to generation. In Australia, we guesstimated around about 240,000, but it may be a lot more. Let's hope, our civilization is around long enough to continue this wonderful story, and maybe at some point in the future, though I completely doubt it, some people may look back at our civilization and thank us for at least something. I don't know what that is. I can't imagine our legacy being thanked in the future. Thank you for that large ocean of plastic that floats out there and joined the two continents together. It's so thick now, we can just walk across it. Thank you for all of the oil repositories that your garbage left behind in the valleys that you just filled up to the top, full of your refuse. What about thank you for those giant rats that lived in your underground caves? What did they call it? Oh, sewer systems. Yes, that's right. Thank you for all those diseases that you helped. No, hang on, I'm going the wrong direction. So I can't imagine what we've left behind in the future, say, 10,000 years in the future. What would we have left behind, Mackie, I'm passing to you, that someone will be thankful for?
Very little.
What about the fact that we're no longer around?
Well, yeah, our absence, I guess, would be the one thing that we can give to future generations. It's what do you miss most about humans? Yeah, that's about right.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Right? Oh, look, it's a bit like that. It's a bit like that.
I had to start with some humor. That's what I had to start with today.
Humor is good, right? It's the gallows humor at present. That's the brand we're selling. Gallows humor. Because it's not as rosy as Dave's tone might indicate. He's fine. Shut up. Well, but I mean, we take Martin Luther's approach. Martin Luther said, or rather, he was asked, what, allegedly, I mean, did he or didn't he, who knows, but it's a nice little story anyway. What would you do if you knew the world was going to end tomorrow? What would you do? And Martin Luther, thought for a little while and said, I'd plant an apple tree. Now, if it's true or not, it does indicate a certain attitude towards life. I can only control my reaction to my circumstances. I can't necessarily control my circumstances. Like, if the end of the world truly is coming, will I spend my time fretting and running around and, beating my chest and, crying into my cup? Well, you shouldn't. You shouldn't. You could plant an apple tree. That's constructive, because you can't control what's coming tomorrow, right? So, anyway.
My friends, Mackie, said that they would turn and face the wind. That, the expression, when they drop the demon seed, I'll turn and face the wind. That I just don't have that in me. I have the fighting spirit.
At some point, I'm not saying it's going to get that way, right? But at some point, you have to ask yourself: do you want to survive a certain event, right? Is it everything is survivable? Do you want to survive? That's the question you have to ask yourself. Just saying, right? Because if it does get bad, which it may, I don't think it will. I'm talking about pure numbers here, right? Much less presently than the Spanish flu. Still much less than the regular flu, in real numbers, right? In actual numbers.
Oh, we've gone into SARS-CoV-2, right?
Oh no, we've well surpassed SARS and all that.
No. We're already now beginning to talk about. Well, if you call it COVID-19, that's the actual disease. So the virus itself is SARS. It's SARS-CoV or CoV for coronavirus 2.
Oh, okay, yes.
That's the actual virus name. Everyone gets it wrong.
which is nice. Sorry
to do that to you.
The MERS and SARS duration 1 and 1 each were nowhere near as infectious as this one is. We still talk. We're talking in the thousands with those. MERS was a lot more lethal, 30-40%. But this one, well, again, it depends, right? We haven't seen this thing run its course, but it does look like around. If you're looking at outpatients data altogether, which is really the only thing you can do intelligently, it hasn't gone above 10% for the fatality rate, and it really is killing off the elderly. So that's what's happening. And if you look at total numbers, it's less than 2% of total reported cases. Right? If you take comfort from these numbers, less than 2% of total reported cases.
That's right. But I've got a graph that's graphing the deaths to the current confirmed, and it's now risen from about 2.5 all the way through to 3 point something or other, and I'll expose that in a minute, right? So as this goes on now, we're seeing the total confirmed cases, and especially within China, starting to decline. So the transmission rates are still very high, but they're starting to transition because I believe that they're quarantining. Their method of doing this is doing one thing. However, I think, Mekki, because there's been 3 different kinds, and we'll get to this stuff, I suppose, right? 3 different kinds of testing. Initially, they just look for anyone with symptoms, fever and malaise and a cough and sneezing and breathing difficulties. They were the things that people were looking for originally, and then it became, okay, we have a DNA testing kit, and you need to run the DNA on the bloom in the saliva, because they found everyone who was presenting, who had it, were presenting in their saliva. So they started doing the DNA testing there, and they were confirming it. But they only had limited amounts of testing kits, and people were dying in the queue and not being counted. There's no post-mortem on the person who's passed away in the queue. They just completely assumed that they've died of some other reason. Doesn't matter. Old age. We're not counting you, right? Because we never got to you, and they've been cremating them. So there's no autopsy. There's no post-mortem. There's no cause of death. No coroner calling it. Just they died. Don't know. Hands in the air, and they didn't get counted. So that's why that huge spike in numbers back on like the 12th or something, right? 14,000 in a day, because they said how many...
yeah, they changed. Correct.
They changed. The WHO stepped in and goes, we're just going to look over your shoulder a minute. What about all these people, 14,000 people in a waiting room, all having the same symptoms? Hey, can we count those? Oh, no, but they're not confirmed. Let's just count them. And so they went...
There's... Yeah, but like you said, Dave put together a few notes here as well, and a key thing to understand, which is what worries me, because we said this from the start. The whole world is about a month behind China in the expressions of this particular disease. It started to increase next week. And we've seen spikes in South Korea. Nothing in North Korea. That's a surprise.
No information comes out of there. That's right.
Nothing. And Japan. And interestingly enough, Iran. And in Iran, it's a big worry, because people are worried that more cases could come out of Iran and being exported into the wider area, the territories that are near Iran. Right. That's really... in fact, the WHO has expressed concerns over the speed at which COVID-19 has spread in Iran, right?
So it started with 2 deaths.
Yeah, and now it's a very rapid increase in a matter of a few days, right? Again, like same thing that happened in Wuhan. So this maybe, and there's some reports. Look, that it might be more serious, the virus in South Korea, for example. And it was actually South Koreans that visited Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories that tested positive.
Wow.
So they may have brought it there.
Well, South Korea was connected with a religious sect. A 60-year-old woman who's in that sect had traveled and met up religiously for a congregation, and she was found to be carrying it, and all of the people in the sect were confirmed to have had the virus, and they're quickly trying to trace her steps because she is like hyper virulent, if that makes sense, hyper contagious. Everyone, no one really touched her, right? I don't know what kind of religious sex. Maybe they're doing something. Maybe it's religious sex, not sect, that is happening because some of the things we know that have come into question with the with how this virus transmits is, droplets were first assumed because of sneezing and coughing and atomizing the virus who's in your lung moisture. That makes sense. Then the blooms in the saliva, they went, oh well, it survives in your mouth acid, that's fine, cool. Fecally, yeah, they found also, yeah, super spreader, that's right, Hovey. Fecal matter, they found it survives on the surface for days. It's also in your sputum, clearly, because it's still more body liquids. Now the question is, does it transmit via the air? Like, not just in atomized form, though. Actually by just exhaling. Because, when you exhale, there is vapor, but is it vapor that it can travel in? And that's what they're really worried about now, and that's the question. And the second question that has been raised recently because of the amount of newly born children, they've ruled out so far placenta crossing. The Zika virus was able to get into the placenta, but it doesn't look like this can. So that's something. At least it's some good news. But see, Mekki, there's exponential countries and there's countries with slow growth.
Yeah. So you're right, but it's actually, exponential growth at least would push you into action. The slow growth countries are worse because, as we've now learned, there's a single case. I mean, this is all anecdotal. None of this has been done. There's no rigorous scientific testing, so we have to take it at face value. There was a person on one of the cruise liners in Japan. I think it was a U.S. citizen who tested negative. So the 2-week period of quarantine had passed, and he came off the ship, and I think it was a guy, older guy, and so off he goes home, and then almost 4 weeks after he was first exposed, did he test positive. So there was a 2-week quarantine, and then nothing. It's good. Oh yeah, you're sweet. Off you go. And then it turns out that no, actually, after the passage of another 2 weeks, he in fact was infectious. He in fact had the coronavirus. So all these people. So there's 3 things that are happening, which are a real big problem. One, the quarantine is almost up. In fact, tomorrow, I think, for the very first people that went into quarantine, places like America, Australia, and so forth, they're going to come out of quarantine, right? But only 2 weeks have passed. That's number one. Number two, and I'm talking about Australia now specifically. Australia is going to relax its borders or its border policy, letting in some Chinese high school students, year 11 and 12 students, on a case-by-case basis, right? Not university students yet, high school students. Okay, so that's the one. And then the final thing that I find worrying is that if you have gone out into the world, if you have been released from quarantine, right, and then you just go your merry way, we have absolutely no way at all of controlling what you do or where you go, even knowing where you've been. And you can't sterilize an entire country. Right, it's just not possible. An Italian city, believe it or not, has just shut down.
Yeah,
as well.
And they've got 79.
So it's the first city outside of China that shut down. Yeah, and soccer. No, it's affected a whole bunch of stuff. Now that they're thinking about it might affecting the Olympic Games, which are due to be held in Japan this year.
However, they've said that if Japan's terrible, they're going to move it to England.
Well, always assuming England is not terrible, right? That's really the thing. Because again, if we do that, we're talking of several million people traveling. Yeah, that's the thing.
Do you think this could be, despite them having a secondary location for it, do you think this might be the first Olympics ever held, well, not held because of a pandemic? Isn't that interesting?
It's the first because of the pandemic. Of course, World War II led to the cancellation of 2 or 3 Olympic Games. So that's happened. The last one was in 1932.
Yeah.
1930 in Berlin.
That's right.
Obviously, prior to
very charismatic leader was the first television broadcast into space.
That's true.
Yeah.
That is correct. and anyway, but the point is that we're seeing this now affecting like many other things apart from just people's jobs and whatnot. This is affecting sporting events and the effects to the economy. These are now all indirect effects. Now imagine the Olympics don't happen. Let's for a second. Let's play that game.
Sure.
If they don't happen again, massive amounts of travel will be cancelled. Already in Australia, I think the airline industry is forecast, or maybe it was global. It was a $3 billion loss.
Yeah,
$3 billion.
Yeah.
On the bright side, though, this is really interesting. In Wuhan, the air has never been cleaner. Well, it hasn't been cleaner in recent history because there's little pollution going on. Probably most of Hubei province would have clean air. But the point is, so you've got losses that are knocking on now. So these travel itineraries will be cancelled. There won't be any flights. Japan is going to obviously have an impact. They've built the stadiums for no point, although for no reason. It's not going to happen. It might be moved somewhere else if we can, but we might not be able to because, again, we're always thinking, well, it should blow over. People tell me, we're going to reach peak outbreak soon. Well, no. Why? Based on what?
That's right.
I want to know, right?
Well, it's time to release everyone's borders now. That's what it is.
Yeah,
let's just let everyone to roam again and let's get back to business, Mekki says a true capitalist. So, so where the controls in both quarantine and medical procedures are of extremely high quality, the growth rate is controlled and maybe the effect maybe enough in slowing or stopping the transmission. This is what we've seen. So in the countries where, I'm not trying to put down the countries like South Korea and Japan and Iran, or even that, for that matter, Japan. I'm not trying to put them down. I'm just saying, okay, so it was noted that in China, the sick were with the well, and there was no zoning inside the hospitals. There was no red zone, amber zone, green zone. So the green zone was entirely safe to You could walk through the green zone without protective clothing on. You couldn't go through the amber zone. That required a cleansing, and you wouldn't want to go into the red zone. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So building an entire, facility, I think it was, kudos to China, just for the repatriation of the people who have the virus, or if, I think that's it. That's very good. I was liking this, Mekki, to be honest. Imagine if this virus was something like it turns you into a zombie. Right, so we've got a cruise ship. No, my poor brain, right? So you'll suffer from that, from my brain, because I didn't tell you a story. So the cruise ship, right, the Diamond Princess, moored off Japan, was coined the Petri dish because you weren't allowed off. Everyone was getting sicker. More people were, contracting the virus. The controls were found to be inadequate. So what controls did they do? Well, they confined everyone to their cabins who had shared air conditioning, right? They only let certain people out, like prisoners, to experience light, the sun's light, in staggered sections. So all those people who weren't currently showing as having the virus. Those who were getting shipped off, and that number was getting reduced. However, they were having combined contact with single pieces, staff members. So the staff members were contacting multiple cabins, and they were found to be carrying the disease and then spread it that way. So there wasn't a one-to-one. There was no control into staff, passenger controls. So in the end, what does it mean? A 2,670 capacity passenger ship had nearly a quarter of the passengers infected, and they shipped hundreds of passengers off the ship to origin countries. Right? And more of those have been confirmed to have the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Now, weeks later, right? England only sent theirs a couple of days ago, but the US were first, and that really upset Trump. Ours, they sent them up to Darwin to an old mining camp, and that's pretty cool. But you know what? Those people who have contracted the virus now contribute to the country that they're in, not from the ship. Not to that total. So the people who remain on the ship, sadly, the 634 currently infected by the virus, that number doesn't go up, even though the people that were whisked off the ship are now starting to show. And that's really concerning for me, right? Because in the end, it really should have reflected on the ship's totals. That's to me. But what about government messaging?
Well, this is the problem, right? We haven't really had any good messaging of it anywhere. So when we say messaging, we're talking about communications flow in general, right? But I'm gonna come to your notes in a second here. But what we haven't had is a confirmation of any of the actual information that we've been giving or been getting. Because it changes. Now, we were told our incubation period is 2 weeks. Well, we actually don't know what the incubation period is. People aren't infectious after they get better. It appears right. they may be infectious. In fact, right? So we okay, that's not so good. We don't like that. We also find that we don't really know what happens or how virulent it is. We don't know. How to treat it properly. A vaccine now, apart from initially they said, it could be 3-4 months away. It's now 1.5 years away.
Yeah, 18 months. That's right.
Yeah. So the information that we are getting is fluctuating back and forth and up and down, and it's just poor. It's poor information. And then they've got. I read some not a manifesto, but there was a Chinese language document released, which was translated then by a conspiracy site. Which said that this is in fact not a coronavirus at all. It is an agent that has escaped with a 100% fatality rate. Now, that would be a lot harder to hide at this point, right? So, and people wouldn't get better, but clearly people have gotten better. So I'm happy to discard that particular nugget of information. But there's whenever there's a vacuum of information, people just will fill it with the stuff they make up. But look, it's evident that a quick response using accurate information from the top down is important, right? That's clear. The reach of the messaging is a strong factor too, where the population may not have access to these messages by way of technology, electricity, or living in isolated communities away from the epicenter, right? Now that can cause complacency and maybe even enough to put people at risk. These are Dave's thoughts, and I completely agree. The biggest problem here we're having is that some of the countries that are exposed aren't in as good a shape as we are in Australia, as the United States are, as large parts of Europe are, for example, right? Because the healthcare system is just poor. It's just, they're having a hard enough time to keep the population alive as it is, right? Africa really worries me. South America, India, those places, if you should get out, those places worry me. It's just because you get 1.5 billion people in India. I've been to India, right? It's a nice, lovely country and all that, but I tell you, if something went rampant there, because there's people everywhere all the time, to impose a quarantine on any Indian city, you do have to bring in the military and be pretty harsh about it. I think that's my opinion, right? It's just such a massive amount of people. Africa is suffering. Southeast Asia, some parts are suffering from a poor healthcare system. Some parts of South America are suffering from a poor healthcare system. So the problem is here. not so much that we can't respond. I mean, we can clearly treat it. I mean, you get the right help, ventilation machines, intravenous liquids if you need them, anything that helps your kidneys and liver, because this coronavirus, while it does look like a flu infection initially, it then attacks after the lungs, it goes into your liver and kidneys, so reduced liver and kidney function, which in fact can also lead to kidney failure. So people can actually die from the kidney failure.
That's your organ failure, absolutely, yes. So, Meki, you're so right, because to tell the truth, 1 billion people on the planet don't live like you do. Like the people who are listening to this message right now. Possibly the most people at risk are those who live in dense population centres. Combine this with close quarters living and public experiences with poor hygiene and awareness, and we have a petri dishes everywhere ready to explode, just like the ship. And like I said, I'm not pointing the finger, but I'm just naming those countries, similar to what Meki said about their medical systems. But this is about the hygiene and where they live and how close quarters they live, and just their awareness is much lower, right? Because to be honest, they've been living in their countries the way they have, and they don't see these kinds of problems. But you get one of these viruses, which is extremely contagious, and then it puts all of these practices to shame. So India, Philippines, Malaysia, North and South Korea, for instance, and Vietnam come to mind. That's just top of mind countries. I'm sure there are other places in the world where living conditions are similar, where, washing your hands before every meal just isn't a thing. Mm-hmm. Washing your hands after going and getting food isn't a thing. Touching, because, in the Western country, we have shopping carts or trolleys, right? Shopping trolley, shopping cart. And everybody has touched that handle. Mm-hmm. And in a pandemic, I covered this a long time ago, that is the place which is the most infectious, because you don't know what other people have done and how they haven't been clean, and that handle that you hold in the shopping cart is the worst place for it. Mm-hmm. So I feel sorry for those people who won't hear this message and won't know, but they're at risk, and they'll never hear it. Their government won't tell them. And this is what's going to happen. So even if 3%, Meki, 3% of 78,000 is still a big number. Oh, yeah. And having to tell those friends and family of those people, or the people who just simply passed away, that they're not going to make it. I saw some underground footage, Meki, coming from the hospital, where an old man was delivered to a hospital, and he was wheezing. He had a fever. He wasn't tested for the virus. He was having one-to-one care with a doctor in like a private consulting room, not a level 3 quarantined area with plastic and positive air or filtered air, nothing like that. And the machine, there was a machine measuring his heart rate, and the family were there, just a single person with saying hello to the doctor, and look, I've just brought him in. He's not doing very well. He goes, well, he's not going to make it. He's breathing terribly right now. And that was the end of that. That was the end. They didn't even attempt to put him on a ventilator. With 5% compressed air, whatever it is that there's some things, right? Yeah, they could have
at some point, yeah. Yeah, but look, it's as harsh as it sounds. Of course, if it happens to you, then it's the end of the world. But there is such a thing as battlefield triage, and it is imperative that the medical personnel save the people that they can save.
That's right.
While not wasting, I know this sounds horrible, wasting their time on people they cannot save.
That's when you have limited ability to save everybody.
Yeah. Let me give you a simple example. In Germany, you can't actually do your driver's license, until you do 18 double hours, so 36 hours of first aid, and pass the test of the first aid thing, right? So that's the first aid. And one of the things that stuck in my brain, because it's many, many years since I've done it, was that when you come to the scene of an accident, car accident, any accident, you always go to the people that are quiet first. the people that are screaming, they're going to be okay. They're still very much alive, screaming for help, right? But the people that are quiet and just lying there, they're the closest to death's door. Now, if everything, all things being equal, if you've got medical equipment, you can actually have the time to save these people. That's where you need to go first, right? But if you hadn't, then you need to go. You know that no help is coming. You go and help the people that clearly can still be helped. Horrible, right?
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, it's a completely utilitarian decision that you're making there, right?
I completely understand from a medical point of view.
Yeah. So
it's not cold, it's not harsh, it's just the way of the world.
Yeah,
it's like watching a nature film.
Yeah.
Watch as the antelope is torn apart by the lion.
Why doesn't the cameraman stop the lion from tearing apart the antelope? Right?
That's right. Exactly.
And again, you have these pictures, these iconic pictures. There's a child, I saw this recently, really quite a shocking picture, an African child, or toddler maybe, lying on the dirt floor in a prone position, like if you do yoga, it's the child position. And there's a vulture probably 3-4 meters behind the child. And obviously the photographer took that picture to make a point, but I just hope that at the very least he would have shooed away the vultures and taken the child somewhere and given it some food.
Impartial so you can't photography making.
Well, yeah, you can't just be a documenter of the world. You're living in it. Yes, you should document it, but if you're just there documenting, then you're worse than people that ignore it, right, or don't know about it. Anyway. That's just me, right?
So look, there was a news release by Simone Gao this week, and if you think you need to find her on YouTube, and this is from China's perspective. She's presented new information to the world, which I think will come quite as maybe a surprise to you, or maybe not. It has been revealed that China's leader Xi Jinping has passed new safety regulations to set a new level of standard for manipulation of viruses in laboratories. And this legislation is to tighten procedures to ultimately prevent future leaks of viruses from laboratories. Now, this is very interesting, that this only just came out this week. When you read between the lines, it appears to be putting in place measures which show that the Chinese government has controlled something that when it is eventually discovered that maybe SARS-CoV-2 was a creation in a lab that escaped, it can say that it's already rectified it. But this revelation could also be the admission that it knew. But I suppose they will deal with this in due time. It could also mean that the virus was made outside of China, say in Canada, as we have previously mentioned, and imported to China instead, rather than being manufactured within China. We don't have the conclusive proof yet and may not ever know. It seems as though the cleansing of this data is already taking place.
If it was made, though, Dave, and I'm playing devil's advocate
here we go.
If it was made, which is fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then if it was made, then we should know all the protein sequencing already. We shouldn't have wasted weeks and weeks on sequencing the protein of the virus, right? The spike proteins and so forth. And there should be a vaccine, maybe not readily available, let's say, but certainly much closer to being created than it would have been if truly the world is all of a sudden faced with a completely new virus, which we have to, map genetically, and we have to understand the protein structures, etc., etc. That's just my thinking, right?
I completely agree. As far as the vaccine, though, they're making thousands of viruses and they're joining them together, and they're like, from a creative point of view, it would be a wonderful experience to be able to, play with something that becomes awful, right? To be able to make a pathogen so severe or chronic that there would be no stopping it. Mm-hmm. And that would be, that would, like, it sounds a little morbid, but that would be a wondrous thing to be able to do. Being able to reverse that and maybe breaking it down or making a cure for it in case that it was ever discovered in the wild. But, if you made it in a lab, then it's unlikely it's going to eventuate in real life. But they're what thesis are made of, Mickey. This is there's a doctorate right there creating a virus, right? Whether or not you cure it or not. So I started to look into the claim that was made. It was originated from a tweet about that the husband and wife pair being arrested from the Canada viral lab, and then ended up going back to Wuhan. And apparently there was something in around this. And look, CBS News reported in July that a researcher, this is July 2019, with ties to China, had been escorted out of the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg, in Canada. The doctor, I can't pronounce this, the first name.
Let me see.
Zhang
Guo. I just murdered that.
There's people rolling in their graves.
Zhang Guo.
Okay, so it's true. Yeah, so Dr. Wee was escorted from the lab amid investigation by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police into a possible policy breach. That's all the things said initially. And now a debunking site I found seems to claim that there's no evidence to suggest she was guilty of anything, which sort of lifts the guilty lid on this thing and says, well, nothing happened. But the government travel documents that show that Wee was invited to Wuhan National Biosafety Laboratory of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. That story, published in October, so shortly afterwards, also says that she was visited the Chinese Academy of Science in another university in China, the Chinese Medical Academy of Science and Beijing Institute of Biotechnology, and that she spoke at several conferences, including some organized by the World Health Organization on the Chinese Society of Virology and International Symposium of Emerging Viral Disease. It also notes that the collaboration amongst scientists is common, right, across the world. So emerging viral disease, created something in a lab, shipped it off. It all seems like it fits together, but it says that Wee wasn't removed from the Canadian lab for sending pathogens to Wuhan facility. It was for procedural failures, whatever that means. It could have been, this is our tinfoil hat zone, it have been for sending to Wuhan lab some viruses she was working on, but failed to fill in the correct forms in an effort to hide the true identity of the virus. This is the question that I'm raising here, because it was just procedural. So how could you get escorted from a lab and basically fired for a procedural breach? What, drinking the virus you're making, trying to become superhuman? I'm just kidding. It would have to be something around that. Now, I actually watched maybe it was the CBS News. I watched the news, a true news outlet, reading this story to air, and they said that it was a husband and wife, and that there was a policy breach, but they said that they'd shipped these viruses. So whether or not they hadn't checked their facts or not, I don't know. It's something else. So, is it a leak? Was it a leak? Was it a leak out of the Wuhan virus, labs? Was it?
Maybe.
It's possible, right?
Some Wuhan, potentially, because that's where we seem to be able to pinpoint the first emergence. Was it a deliberate release? Or was it leaked maybe in transit? Who knows? Who knows?
Oops.
You'd be surprised how many oops moments we have in history.
Yeah, that's right.
Whoops, whoopsie. And since 5 a.m. in the morning, we have started shooting back. Whoops.
Oops.
Yeah.
Boss, I dropped one of the things. Is that all right? I'd leave. If I was you, I'd leave. I tried to mop it up, but could it be viral warfare? I don't think we can rule it out, right?
No. Again, and this is where people have, funnily enough, asked me about my opinion a number of times. What do you think, Mackie? What do you think? And I go, look, I honestly, I don't know. The answer is I have no idea at this point. I've got an idea, but I don't want to share it with you. What I do think, though, is it is extremely suspicious as to when this happened, right? If you wanted to hurt China, and make no mistake, by extension, the rest of the world, and you have to follow the money, because you're hurting China. Yes, that's ticking a box. Okay, we're hurting China. You're shutting down the economy. Whatever.
Trade wars.
But
did someone say trade wars? Trade wars.
No, but see, the thing is this, Dave. Unless you see yourself as separate from the country you represent, America is one of the countries that will suffer the most, or is suffering the most from a weakened China, economically speaking. I mean, Apple. It's like some crazy number, like 1 million iPhones a day, a week, a day, whatever it is. Some crazy number, like 1 million a week or a day. No, they're not being produced, right?
Well, think about this: the amount of Apple workers are going to go up.
Well, no, but that's the thing. Australia is suffering massively. The tourism industry, the airline industry,
completely,
and
our export is suffering.
Yeah, but think about it a little bit further. You have to now really think in the long game here, right? The long game is that if we're losing, right now I think the number is around $3 billion in the airline industry. You're not going to buy jets. There won't be any budget for jet upgrades. They simply won't. So Boeing and
then it's a kick-on effect, right? The knock-on effect.
Yeah, it is. Airbus. None of them, and these are American companies for the most part, right? So to say flippantly, America attacked China, I think that's a foolish thing to say, because you have to understand the implications. Of course, now let me take a step back. If someone hasn't thought through these consequences, then you could argue that maybe certain people in power today in this world are in fact capable of that. But if you ask me where I put my money, if this were an attack, I put it with Russia. I put my money on Russia. Russia and China have had territorial disputes going back forever, really, ever since there was a Russia and a China. Especially down the resource-rich areas. Well, that's the thing, right? And there were many wars that were fought over the possession of certain parts of land. So Russia is a candidate, and I wouldn't put it past Israel either, right? Because China and by proxy, I guess, is supporting North Korea, and therefore by proxy is supporting some of the Middle Eastern players that are in cohorts against Israel. Yeah. So can argue that if you hurt China, you could hurt and then it's interesting that we see here now the first Iranian of all places outbreak. Look, I'm just spitballing here, right? This is I don't know, it's possible, but again, the time, Dave, is what makes me suspicious.
The timing of the event, absolutely the most suspicious thing. If it was mid-year, you couldn't connect it. But for ideal, bang for buck, absolutely, it occurred at exactly the right time.
Yeah.
For worldwide spread, I've got to ask, because I get asked this all the time, is it a case of animal virus? Look, it's been stated that the bat coronavirus is similar to support the hypothesis that it jumped in the wet market from an exotic species to humans, bats, for instance. But when they tested that against, and I've got a note, but we've only got a few minutes left, so I'll be really quick. It's only got a 96.9% match, and it is not high enough to support the theory. Remember that chimps are 98.8% the same, as only 1.2% difference. A virus is vastly smaller in complexity, and this amount of difference is too much. That the entire human population on Earth, just to give you another fact, is only 0.1% different from each other. Isn't that crazy? So, Mackie, why are the number of infected each day jumping around?
No, we know why they jumped around initially, because different testing methodologies and processes were used. So we had a spike, we had a callback, we had a countdown. I mean, if someone presents with flu symptoms, right, are you going to test them? In the West, we would say, probably you should. That might not be the case everywhere, right? In fact, some numbers were retracted. Oh no, that was too high. We have retested. It's not that. It's chaos. I think we should look at the trend. Forget each day. Forget each day. Each day is completely meaningless. You need to look at the trended number, and Dave has got a pretty good diagram here. So you need to look at the trended number, and that's your source of truth, because trended numbers and statistics can give you a good answer here, even though you can't trust it other times. But each day when it jumps around, and these spikes or even under reportings, they will actually even out in the trend. Right? The trend will just keep going the way it does. And so ignore the jumping around of numbers. Completely irrelevant. It is the only thing that matters is which way are we trending. That's the only thing that we should look at.
The hospitals themselves were hopelessly outnumbered, and it was like Justin Bieber tickets. They were going around the block.
But think about this, Dave.
Yeah.
Exactly. So let's take your scenario. I mean, how much? In a project, if you're familiar with project management methodology, there are 3 factors which determine the outcome of a project. Right? 3 factors. One is money. So cost, quality, and time. Okay. So if you want it done real well, you probably have to spend a lot of time and money. Right? If you don't care about the quality, you can do it cheap and fast. But my point here is these 3 factors almost universally determine anything we do, right? And if you want done something well, you need a lot of people to do it, right? So you need a lot of time. So you have to throw money at it to pay people, and you have to have a lot of time to do it as well. So what I'm seeing with this here is there's a shortage of time and there's a shortage of resources, i.e. cost. So there are not enough people to administer tests. They're needed to actually treat the people. So I don't think too many tests are necessarily being administered all the time. So I think, there's an under-reporting possible. There's this false reporting. In fact, if you're testing like 1,000 people, I mean, how many of those tests are then contaminated?
That's right.
Or cross-contaminated, or lost, or what? Who knows, right?
Or the patient dies when you get the test back.
Sure.
You go, well, they're dead. I'm not going to mark them up.
There you go. Right.
And what about your attrition? So your attrition of the doctors and nurses. Sure. Yeah. That's also occurring.
Well, thousands of healthcare workers in China are sick. We know that. Right? We know that for a fact. Because they haven't got the appropriate protection. I mean, I myself bought these. What are these called? I'll tell you what they're called.
Smartly.
They're called Cambridge masks. It's N99.
Nice.
It filters air pollution, virus, and bacteria. I got the adjustable one. Blah blah blah. From the UK, they're military grade. I'm told British technology. They got an expiry date December 2023. They're effective for a few months, so clearly they're not forever, right? But essentially what it says here, hand wash with warm water and soap and powder, you can hang to dry. And end classification mask filters solid particulate matter, such as PM 2.5. Mask must be fitted properly, etc., etc., etc. So I bought the real thing. I didn't buy the Bunnings, paint mask. That doesn't do anything.
Yeah, that's right. You just breathe around the sides of it.
Yeah, and look, have I used them yet? No, I haven't. But here in Sydney, the situation isn't quite as dire. I don't think. I don't think.
Well, wait till we see the release of the opening of the gates, the floodgates, to say.
Well,
and we'll see what happens.
I'll keep everybody home. I've already told my team or my teams across Australia to work from home.
Yeah.
If things get, make sure you get enough food and water. I know that's as a boss, I guess that sounds crazy. But ultimately, I'm responsible for the well-being of my team, right? And this is across the nation, and I don't want them to come to the office when they have a risk of exposing themselves to a disease. Anyway,
there's the music.
Don't go away. Donate if you can.
Absolutely.
Hello and welcome back to Dave and Mackie's Shiny Side Out, talking about the virus. Well, actually, really talking about biological weapons, but I think
doesn't it just dovetail right in?
The COVID-19 virus outbreak is certainly a timely reminder that biological weapons are a reality. Dave, go ahead and dovetail.
Okay, but this is show 414. Or
410 and 400. That's actually good. That sounds good.
Yeah, it does. 410 and 400. The other day during the week we saw, what was it? 02/22/2020, which is also palindrome. So I thought that was also interesting. I sit around and we have what was it? Was that party that Lisa went to where they work with palindromes? Anyway,
Oh,
do you remember that?
yeah.
That's very.
Where all the smart kids went.
Yeah, that's right.
Palindromes and anagrams.
Yeah, that's
That's right.
awesome.
Alec Guinness, genuine class. Well done. Sorry, an anagram is something that is you rearrange the letters of those words into something else. And that's and the palindrome is the same back to front.
That's correct.
Those are the two things. In case you're wondering,
So
you elitist swine.
elitist swine. That's funny because Belinda woke up this morning. She's not feeling very well, and I've isolated her in her room, and I've used the wipes and everything on all the doors, and just
For real?
for real, yeah, for real.
No, for real.
Flu,
Like
yeah, but it's the upper respiratory flu, not a lower respiratory flu. That's bubbling the whole house off, and I'll live in a tent. Anyway, so just saying, it was very funny. She walked out this morning and says, "Guten Tag." Okay, so because I what's funny about it was I just watched a video where a lady had a head injury and she woke up with different accents from all around the world.
That's interesting.
Yeah, in places that she'd never been to, or particularly heard, and they were pretty good. So remember how we've spoken about someone who had a head injury and who had spoken a different language?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it wasn't quite as good as that, sadly. But I think we should just jump straight into this, right?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So this is 2014, a story from 2014. This is tuberculosis in Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea teetering on the brink of a runaway tuberculosis epidemic, health workers say. This is from March 2014. Papua New Guinea is said to be teetering on the brink of a tuberculosis epidemic. There are 15,000 new cases of tuberculosis recorded annually in the Papua New Guinea, PNG, and the World Health Organization says nearly a quarter of those cases prove fatal.
Yeah,
now,
that's pretty bad.
The story goes on, and it says people living with HIV in PNG they're most at risk of contracting tuberculosis.
Mm-hmm.
It's also known as a disease of poverty, of overcrowding, of many of the social issues Papua New Guinea faces.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, we already mentioned this kind of living. I didn't mention PNG, but in other countries, and it doesn't help. So Mr. Watson said, worryingly, cases of drug-resistant and extra drug-resistant tuberculosis are increasing in PNG. We've now learned, Mackie, haven't we? We've learned that it's on our doorstep. As far as Australia is concerned, fully drug-resistant. But I didn't know there was an extra drug-resistant tuberculosis. That's like the
super.
Yeah, completely unstoppable. Good luck with that. Fatal. So these things, Mickey, at this time in our civilization, with advances in medicine and maybe it's a little bit of complacency, truly, right, around our thought that cleanliness is all we need to do and our lives are fine and nothing happens, and then suddenly, boom, we get an uppercut or a king hit from some kind of virus that, this one's sort of our fault though, right? Because we've been putting drugs onto it, and it's oversubscribing antibiotics. You take it.
No, look, you're 100% correct. It is our fault. You're correct, and in fact, we will see this with many other diseases. And we've got an update, and Dave, I've just sent you the link. I wasn't able to paste it into the text, but I'm going to paste it into the text post-mortem.
Post-haste-mortem?
Essentially, so the article we just shared with you was from March 2014. There's an update from June 2019, so just 9 months or so ago, less than that, in fact. And the article is, a raging TB epidemic in Papua New Guinea threatens to destabilize the entire Asia-Pacific region. A global post, and the article was written by Lucy Sheriff, right? it's really an indictment of what we've done here. In Papua New Guinea, a TB epidemic threatens to turn into a disaster that could destabilize the Asia-Pacific region. Situated about 90 miles from Australia in the Pacific Ocean, the island nation sees more than 100 cases of TB every day. Now, and of these cases, 5 are drug-resistant strains. So 5% are drug-resistant strains, and 10 people will die according to WHO figures or WHO. Additionally, in Papua New Guinea, 86% of the country's 8 million citizens live in rural areas with little or no access to healthcare, which of course further obscures the numbers of TB infections. And now, the Papua New Guinean government faces a Herculean task to battle the epidemic that has plagued the country. And the reason I'm mentioning this new article is because we brought this to you guys back in 2014. We mentioned it. So back then, this article, the one that Dave just shared, was new. There was a new article, right? And it says here in the article, at the first line Dave just shared with you, Papua New Guinea is said to be teetering on brink of a tuberculosis epidemic.
Yeah.
Now we say the article is a raging. This is 2019. A raging TB epidemic in Papua New Guinea threatens to destabilize the entire Asia Pacific. Now, in 5 years, we've gone from teetering on the brink to raging epidemic. And what was the news cycle on that? Did anybody get the news cycle on that? Did you, Dave? Did you hear much?
I never even saw it it didn't make the news. Remember the top 5 stories in a whole day? That's all you get to see. All the other things. Well, clearly saving a cat from a tree was more important than telling everyone that we're all about to die of tuberculosis or multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, for that matter.
Absolutely. The report, there's a report published in May by Economist Intelligence
Unit. You can't tell people we're killing them.
Okay. There's a report that was published by... You shut up now. No, but look, Dave is making a point here, though, right? This has been going on for 5 years, and I don't see any resources being pumped on this. And sorry, but there was a report published May 2019 by the Economist Intelligence Unit, and they warned of the consequences of failing to act against drug-resistant TB. That's the one that Dave just mentioned, calling the current response a global failure. In the same month, again last year, the United Nations issued an urgent warning about the growing peril of drug-resistant infections. The report stated at least 700,000 people die worldwide each year due to drug-resistant diseases. 230 of those, or roughly 30%, that's about right, they die from multi-drug-resistant TB. TB. Now, the coronavirus is a virus, right? TB is a bacterium. Okay, so antibiotics will do nothing. Yeah, they'll be doing nothing for coronavirus. Antibiotics are completely necessary for the treatment of bacteria.
And we can tell you why. Is because bacteria can replicate on their own, and a virus requires a host.
Exactly right. 100% correct. Not only that. Now, if our antibiotics fail at one point in the future, which they probably will, I hope not, but they probably will. I urge you all to research bacteriophages. Now, bacteriophages actually are viruses for the most part that eat bacteria. Right? So each thing in the world, in the natural world, has another thing that eats it. That's just how it works in the world, right? It's a food chain. Something is eaten by something that eats something else, and so on and so forth, until we get to the really tiny. And each bacterium has something called a bacteriophage, which is that thing that eats it. All right, so these bacteriophages are much smaller than these viruses, right? Much, much, much smaller. If you see pictures of them, it's really quite interesting. But they do eat those horrible bacteria that kill us. So we might have to invest some money, in my opinion, into bacteriophage research. Right, that would be good. Look, in Papua New Guinea, it seems TB is the leading cause of hospitalization and death. Okay, leading cause for 8 million people. TB back in the early 20th century. I remember this because I read about the period extensively. TB was a really big problem. People would be sent away to I guess places like hospitals out in the countryside.
Like a death camp, really.
Well, yeah, but with the idea of people getting better. Sanatoriums and
recuperation camps, right?
Yeah. And because
very high mortality rate.
Well, there was. Yeah, you're right. And it was a wasting disease, right?
That's right.
So And the air quality back in those cities, we're talking like 1870s, 1880s, early 1910, 20, and so forth, was horrible because of industrialization. So that led to a spike in tuberculosis, and because the air was just bad to start with, and if you got that particular disease, you'll be screwed, because essentially it just makes things worse. But a spell in the country could potentially restore you. A lot of famous people, by the way, had tuberculosis back in the day, and it really is a wasting disease where you just just sort of, you waste away. You just die day by day a little bit more. But sorry, that was 100 years ago for Western Europe.
Yeah.
Now we're here in the developing world, 100 years later, where we think we pretty much nipped it in the first world. Right? It's not really an issue anymore. It's a huge issue for the developing world. Not only that. Is that we are now seeing drug-resistant, multi-drug-resistant strains of TB. And you're right, Dave, right at our doorstep. So just an update for you. So we went from teetering on the brink of a tuberculosis epidemic, right, 2014, teetering on the brink, to raging TB epidemic in Papua New Guinea threatens to destabilize the entire Asia Pacific. That's a bit of a wake-up call, I think.
Completely. It would be the same as saying, Mexico or Cuba or something, right? But if it was 8 million people living in Cuba, I'm not sure the population numbers, but that's pretty much what we're talking about. Have you completed that article?
Yes, I'm all done. Thank you, sir.
And we're down to antiquity.
Well, we can go to MDR-TB.
Oh, I thought that's where you went. I thought that's where you were.
Oh, no.
Oh, no, you can take that. All right, you take this one.
Oh, God. I'll take the... Okay, look, what is multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, right? Well, essentially, it is a tuberculosis that is completely resistant to at least isoniazid and rifampicin. So that's INH and RMP, the two most powerful first-line treatments of anti-TB drugs. Isolates that are multiply resistant to any other combination of anti-TB drugs, but not to INH and RMP, are not classified as MDR-TB. Okay. MDR-TB develops in otherwise treatable TB when the course of antibiotics is interrupted and the levels of drug in the body are insufficient to kill 100% of the bacteria. So this is where the overprescription and incorrect usage of antibiotics is really harming us. So this wouldn't really be much of a problem, Dave, if people actually continued or finished their treatment or their course of antibiotics.
Oh, yeah, so, but you're feeling better, make you so you stop, right?
Yeah, but that's the worst thing you can do, right? Because you've let's put it this way, right? You've gone into a village and shot almost everybody, but they go, I think I've shot almost everybody. So I go to the next village. Little did I know that I left 60 hardened fighters in some cellar alive, who are now coming out rampaging after me, right? Because I didn't stay the course. I know it's a horrible analogy, but the point is, if you are going down the way of antibiotics, and these days they're being overprescribed anyway, but let's say you are going down that path, stay the course, finish them, for crying out loud, because even though you're now better, these little critters are still in your system. They're not enough anymore to kill you or to make you sick, but they've been exposed to the treatment, and they're the survivors. They go, oh, I know this thing, man. I'm not going to go near it. Or what do I need to grow in order for it not to be able to affect me anymore? That's what those critters are. Well, they're not thinking it, but that's what happens, when you're talking about bacteria and viruses becoming drug resistant. They adapt. So you have to finish your treatment of antibiotics if you're taking it, or don't take it. Either way, I don't care, right? But please don't. Now that tuberculosis, they're thinking of, that they're actually having some chemotherapy for people. The cancer treatment. So this is just it's just getting from bad to worse. Okay, and multi-drug resistant TB is reported in every country virtually that was surveyed. Some years ago, and then I think it might even be in every country now. Again, some countries are dealing with this better because their health is just better, whereas Papua New Guinea, a third or even fourth world nation, right at the doorstep of Australia, first world nation, where TB isn't really an issue, you can see how the border of the possible is blurring. If enough people from Papua New Guinea come across into Australia, and again, it's 90-something kilometers, right? If you're a good rower, you can row it. I mean, you could even, float across if you're really on a raft if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. But it's not that far away. And now think of climate change as well. Oh, why, Mickey? Why climate change? That's crazy talk. No, let's say we're getting all these climate refugees. Let's say in Papua New Guinea you get these massive forest fires because it's an extremely wooded kind of.
Yeah, that's right. That would be devastating.
Change, right? Yeah, but let's say, oh no, we're going to run away from these fires, or maybe it's a drought, there's water shortage, or whatever it might be. Even though it's close to the equator, so water shortage I can't really see. But let's say it's a huge fires, right? And people, off they go. They're trying to get into Singapore, Malaysia up north, or into larger cities of Indonesia, for that matter. But they're thinking, no, let's go down to Australia. They've got a really good healthcare system. Now this might not be a logical thought process that they have, but Australia, well, that seems to be a better place. So all of a sudden, potentially millions, and there's 8 million Papua New Guineans, right? Potentially millions of people from Papua New Guinea flooding into Australia. Then you can't stop that kind of influx. And some of them, right, will be bringing with them multi-drug resistant TB.
Mm-hmm.
That's the scenario.
I know there's a questionnaire. There is a questionnaire that you're supposed to fill out to say, do you have it? And it's one of the tick boxes. But you know what? People fail those tick boxes all the time.
Yes, correct. Now, it's actually airborne. So MDR tuberculosis is an airborne pathogen.
Yeah.
With active pulmonary, so persons with active pulmonary tuberculosis caused by a multi-drug resistant strain can transmit the disease if they're alive and coughing. That's all you need, alive and coughing.
That's enough.
TB strains, are often less fit and less transmissible, and outbreaks occur more readily in people with weakened immune systems. For example, patients with HIV and so forth, which is interesting because some years ago, the Malaysian airliner had both AIDS, HIV, and TB researchers on board, right? The one that was shut down over the Ukraine. So think about all of that, okay? Moldova, all right? In Moldova, 60% of the cases occur in Brazil, China, India, Russian Federation, South Africa, right? There's 500,000 new cases in the world back in 2011. That's what they estimate. 500,000 new cases of MDR TB in the world. In Moldova, it seems the crumbling health system has led to a massive rise of MDR TB. Again, this is a neighboring, like a whole bunch of first world nations in Europe, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Dave.
Poised, ready to go. Hey,
this is it. Yeah.
I know, right? And I just want to say before, I know you're going to hand it to me, so I'm just going to say, I've got on the screen, I've got the latest news break coming from the ABC, and it says, fears coronavirus quarantine regime is compromised as 27-day incubation period detected in man in China's Hubei province. So, sure, he's an outlier, but it's still possible. And it puts in question all of their closures, their quarantine, their, temperature reading on your forehead. It puts all of that out the window. Like it was so insufficient a method of control. It was a control, but it failed. And that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's like saying, I do backups all the time. Where do you put them on? Well, I put them on the USB sticks and I sit them here at my desk next to this large magnet, and I can't read very many of them. A bad analogy. But anyway, just I'll carry on with antiquity. So the earliest documented incident of the intention to use biological weapons is recorded in Hittite texts. There was some 1500 to 1200 BC, in which victims of tularemia were driven into enemy lands, causing an epidemic. Although the Assyrians knew of ergo, a parasitic fungus of rye which produces ergotism when ingested, there is no evidence that they poisoned enemy wells with the fungus, and that as has been claimed. According to Homer's epic poems about the legendary Trojan War, the Iliad and the Odyssey, spears and arrows were tipped with poison during the first sacred war in Greece in about 590 BC. Athens and Fictionic League
Very good.
poisoned the water supply of the besieged town of Kira near Delphi, depending on if you're a coder or not, with the toxic plant hellebore. During the 4th century BC, Scythian archers tipped their arrow tips with snake venom, human blood, animal feces, to cause wounds to become infected. In a naval battle in King Eumenes of Pergamon in 184 BC, Hannibal of Carthage had clay pots filled with venomous snakes and instructed his sailors to throw them onto the decks of enemy ships. Now, I like that. But you're gonna get some attrition there. Boss, it's biting me. Just throw it. Still throw it anyway. Right? A Roman commander, Manius Aquilius, poisoned the wells of besieged enemy cities about 130 BC. In about AD 198, the Parthian city of Hatra near Mosul in Iraq, modern-day Iraq, repulsed the Roman army led by Septimus Severus by hurling clay pots filled with live scorpions at them. There are numerous other instances of the use of plant toxins, venoms, and other poisonous substances to create biological weapons in antiquity. Mackie.
Middle Ages didn't stop there, right? So this whole thought of using biological weapons, because again, cheapest bang for your buck, by far. For chemical, nuclear, conventional, forget it. You get a biological agent. Middle Ages. The Mongol Empire had established commercial political connections between the eastern and western areas of the world, and they did that through the most mobile army that had ever been in existence until that time. The armies composed of the most rapidly moving travelers who had ever moved between the steppes of East Asia, where the bubonic plague was and remains endemic among small rodents, managed to keep the chain of infection without a break until they reached and infected peoples and rodents who had never encountered it. Now, what does that mean? What it means is that the ensuing Black Death may have killed roughly a third of the population of Europe in the next decades, changing the course of Asian and European history. During the Middle Ages, victims of the bubonic plague were used for biological attacks, often by flinging full bites, such as infected corpses and excrement, over castle walls using catapults. In 1346, during the siege of Kaffa, which is now Feodosia in the Ukraine, the attacking Tatar forces, which were Empire under Genghis Khan, used the bodies of Mongol warriors of the Golden Horde who had died of the plague as weapons. An outbreak of plague followed, and the defending forces retreated, followed by the conquest of the city by the Mongols. It had been speculated, or rather it has been speculated, that this operation may have been responsible for the advent of the Black Death in Europe. At the time, the attackers thought that the stench was enough to kill them, though it was the disease, of course, that proved deadly in the aftermath. At the siege of Thun-le-Vec in 1340, during the 100 Years' War, the attack into the besieged. In 1422, during the siege of Karlstein Castle in Bohemia, Hussite attackers used catapults to throw dead, but not plague-infected bodies, and 2,000 carriage loads of dung over the walls. The last known incident of using plague corpses for biological warfare occurred in 1710, when Russian forces attacked the Swedes by flinging plague-infected corpses over the city walls of Reval, which is the modern city of Tallinn. However, during the 1785 siege of Lacal, Tunisian forces flung diseased clothing into the city. English longbowmen usually did not draw their arrows from a quiver, rather they stuck the arrows into the ground in front of them. This allowed them to knock the arrow faster, and the dirt and soil was likely to stick to the arrowheads, thus making the wounds just that much more likely to become infected. Dave?
Yeah, and we are talking about times when we didn't have antibiotics. So even cutting yourself, just shaving in the morning could kill you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If you weren't, appropriately clean.
That's how we started using a cologne after shaving.
Yeah.
To disinfect your face. I mean, it smells nice, good for you, but initially they just splashed alcohol in their face.
That's right.
That's it. 100%.
Yeah, one for me, one for my face. North America. The Native American population was devastated after contact with the Old World due to the introduction of several fatal infectious diseases, notably smallpox. That's the smallpox blankets I referred to earlier with the blankets in the top of the show. These diseases can be traced to Eurasia, where people had long lived with them and developed some immunological ability to survive their presence without similarly long ancestral exposure. Indigenous Americans were incapable of he knows what word is there. Oh, good on you. They were incapable of fighting off the disease and therefore contracted it and were extremely vulnerable. There are 2 documented instances of biological warfare by the British against North American Indians during the Pontiac's Rebellion. This was 1763 to 1766. In the first, during a parley at Fort Pitt on June 24th, 1963, Captain Simeon Ecuyer gave representatives of the besieging Delawares 2 blankets and a handkerchief that had been exposed to smallpox, hoping to spread the disease to the natives in order to end the siege. William Trent, a militia commander, left records that clearly indicated the purpose of giving the blankets was to convey the smallpox to the Indians. British Commander Lord Geoffrey Amherst, and Swiss British officer Colonel Henry Bucket discussed the topic separately in the course of the same conflict. There exists correspondence referring to the idea of giving smallpox-infected blankets to enemy Indians. It cited 4 letters from June 29th, 13th, 16th, and the 26th in 1963. Excerpts. 1763. Amherst wrote, there's a quote here, July 16th, it says 1763. And here's the quote. P.S. You will do well to try to inoculate the Indians by means of blankets, as well as to try every other method that can serve to extirpate this execrable race. I should be very glad your scheme for hunting them down by dogs could take effect. Bucket replied on July 26th the same year. I received yesterday your Excellency's letters of 16th with their enclosures, the signal for the Indian messages, and all your directions will be observed. So he says he's going to do it. Wow.
But it is quite something when you look at the language that they would actually put it into writing. A method that can serve to extirpate the execrable race.
Yeah.
That is what it means really, is that we want to extinguish, we want to make them extinct, this race which is you can imagine, you know what excrement is, right? So this is the act of excrementing,
that's right.
if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And you should be very glad for your scheme for hunting them down by dogs could take effect. So once they are in this weakened state, let's hunt them down by dogs. Astounding mindset if you really think about it, right?
But smallpox is highly infectious and does not require contaminated blankets to spread uncontrollably. and together with measles, influenza, chickenpox, and so on, had been doing so since the arrival of Europeans and their animals. Trade and combat also provided ample opportunity for transmission of the disease. There's the smallpox during Pontiac's rebellion. There's a site you should, or links you should go to. It's unclear if the blanket attempt succeeded. It is estimated that between 400 to 500,000 Native Americans, Indians, during and after the war died from smallpox. It seems as though they died from smallpox, but whether it was connected directly with that infection or not is still unclear. Wow. I know. That's something, Mackie, when all else fails, right?
Well, I mean, that was it.
Weapons, again, catapult the sheep, the cows infected, the blankets. Wow.
Yeah, they weren't seen as people. They just weren't seen as people. The British came and we Britannia, hurrah. The next one, though, is interesting. New South Wales. So clearly, having learned lessons, Australian Aborigines, the Kooris specifically, have always maintained that the British deliberately spread smallpox in 1789 because it worked really well 20 years earlier in the Americas. But this possibility has only been raised by historians from the 1980s, when Dr. Noel Butlin suggested there are some possibilities that disease could have been used deliberately as an exterminating agent. Again, and I'm going to go into the text in a second, if you look at the documented British approach in the Americas 20 years earlier, and quite successful, by the way, then it would absolutely be more than logical if they had employed the very same strategy to the Aborigines in Australia, as it worked with the North American Indians, right? Then why wouldn't it work here? Again, the same kind of immunological response or lack of response would have been seen in the isolated population of the Aborigines, which had not been exposed to things like smallpox, measles, etc.
But 20 years back then wasn't a huge expanse of time, but given the methods of communication, taking years absolutely. Backwards and forwards.
Yeah. Correct. They would have said, but we just recently tried this in the Americas.
Yeah.
That worked a treat, old chap. Oh, really? Wow, on you,
Jolly
fella.
show.
Yes.
Jolly good.
Bring it on, then. By Jove. In 1997, David Day claimed there remains considerable circumstantial evidence to suggest that officers other than Phillip, Governor Phillip that is, or perhaps convicts or soldiers, deliberately spread smallpox among Aborigines. And in 2000, Dr. John Lambert argued that strong circumstantial evidence suggests that the smallpox epidemic which ravaged Aborigines in 1789 may have resulted from deliberate infection. Judy Campbell argued in 2002 that it is highly improbable that the First Fleet was the source of the epidemic, as smallpox had not occurred in any members of the First Fleet. The only possible source of infection from the fleet being exposure to variolous matter imported for the purposes of inoculation against smallpox. Campbell argued that while there has been a considerable speculation about a hypothetical exposure to the First Fleet's variolous matter, there was no evidence that Aboriginal people were ever actually exposed to it. Well, they got it from somewhere, right? So you can't argue. You can't argue with the fact that they died from it.
Never had it before.
I know. She pointed to regular contact between fishing fleets from the Indonesian archipelago, where smallpox was endemic, and Aboriginal people in Australia's north, as a more likely source for the introduction of smallpox. She notes that while these fishermen are generally referred to as Macassans, referring to the port of Makassar on the island of Sulawesi, from which most of the fishermen originated, some traveled from islands as distant as New Guinea. I think her argument is flimsy. She noted that there's little disagreement that the smallpox epidemic of the 1860s was contracted from Macassan fishermen and spread through the Aboriginal population via their traditional social, kinship and trading networks. She argued that the 1789 to 90 epidemic followed the same pattern. Look, I would argue very strongly to the fact that the British deliberately tried to infect the Aborigines, and successfully so, with smallpox, Dave.
So that brings us to the 20th century. By the turn of the 20th century, advances in microbiology had made thinking about germ warfare part of the zeitgeist. Jack London, in his short story Ya 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 from 1909, described a punitive European expedition to a South Pacific island, deliberately exposing the Polynesian population to measles, of which many of them died. While much of the material for London's South Sea Tales is derived from his personal experiences in the region, it is not known whether this particular incident is historical. London went on to write a science fiction tale, The Unparalleled Invasion, and it was 1910, in which the Western nations wipe out all of China with a biological attack.
Now, just pause there for a second, right? Now, obviously, we brought this to you 5 years ago, this show. Show number 127 to be precise. And I'm a great fan of Jack London's. I've read all his books. I have the book South Sea Tales in my little bookshelf behind me here. And he did write this story, An Unparalleled Invasion. So it is never far from anyone's mind, these things, right? I mean, we tend to think these days that, oh, no, this can't happen. This is unlikely. None of this, I hope, and this the whole purpose of this particular expose here is to make you think, or to make you understand, rather, that these are definitely possibilities that are being entertained by the people in power, right? The Western nations wipe out all of China with a biological attack. If you look at that, and see, no one has gone far enough back. I mean, they looked at a novel by, was it Dean Koontz? I can't remember, Dave, but there was like a horror novel written in the 1980s, right? Where people died of a virus called Wuhan something or other, right?
400. And Wuhan 400.
Yeah, there you go, Wuhan 400. Yeah, and they go, oh, look at that, he predicted this. Go to Jack London 100 years ago.
That's
right. Where the Western nations wipe out all of China with a biological attack. Hey, how about that?
Them apples. Yeah,
how about that? Sorry, go ahead. Tell us about the First World War.
So during the First World War, this was 1914 to 1918, the Empire of Germany made some early attempts at biological warfare. Those attempts were made by a special sabotage group headed by Rudolf Nauheim, using diplomatic pouches and couriers. The German general staff supplied small teams of saboteurs in the Russian Duchy of Finland and in the then neutral countries of Romania, the United States, and Argentina. In Finland, saboteurs mounted on reindeer placed ampules of anthrax in stables of Russian horses. This is 1916. Anthrax was also supplied to the German military attaché in Bucharest, and as was glanders, which was employed against livestock destined for Allied service. German intelligence officer and US citizen Dr. Anton Casimir Dilger established a secret lab in the basement of his sister's home in Chevy Chase, Maryland, that produced glanders. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, which was used to infect livestock in ports and inland collection points, including at least Newport News, Norfolk, Baltimore, and New York, and probably St. Louis and Covington, Kentucky. In Argentina, German agents also employed glanders in the port of Buenos Aires and also tried to ruin wheat harvests with a destructive fungus. Then we get to the Geneva Protocol of 1925, signed by 108 nations, prohibited the use of chemical weapons and biological weapons, but said nothing about experimentation, production, storage, or transfer. Later treaties did cover these aspects. 20th century advances in microbiology enabled the first pure culture biological agents to be developed by World War II. Mickey, I remember the tales of my grandfather in World War I, where there was mustard gas and a whole bunch of other pathogens, and some of those were unsuccessfully deployed against the enemy, in which the wind changed and it came back on them.
Oh, yeah.
So not entirely 100% successful in their deployment. However, we saw, since then, haven't we seen the development of some of the what's it called, X10 or something. There's another, whatever the most destructive pathogen against humans was created. I hope you get to it.
We might. Look, you die and learn, right? Rather than live and learn.
Yeah,
so
sure.
in this particular instance. Now, unfortunately, as Dave has mentioned, there was no method for verification of compliance addressed. So yes, we make all these rules and you sign them all, but there's no method that we can think of or that we want to put forward that can verify that you're complying with any of these things. Okay,
sure, we are. Okay,
that was a little failure. And that's pretty much why the League of Nations failed. There's no teeth, right? It's similar to the UN, League of Nations. It's all just didn't work.
That was a great cartoon thing.
Hi, mate. Now we're coming to the interwar period and the end World War II, of course, which saw an explosion of these kinds of technologies. In the interwar period, little research was done in biological warfare in both UK and the US at first. In Britain, the preoccupation was mainly in withstanding the anticipated conventional bombing attacks that would be unleashed in the event of a war with Germany. As tensions increased, Sir Frederick Banting began lobbying the British government to establish a research program into the research and development of biological weapons to effectively deter the Germans from launching a biological attack against Britain, obviously. Banting proposed a number of innovative schemes for the dissemination of pathogens, including aerial spray attacks and germs distributed through the mail system. With the onset of hostilities, the Ministry of Supply finally established a biological weapons program at Porton Down, headed by the microbiologist Paul Fields. The research was championed by Winston Churchill, and soon tularemia, anthrax, brucellosis, and botulism toxins had been effectively weaponized. Botulism is what they spray into your face now to make your wrinkles go away. Okay, Botox. Botulism toxin.
Inject,
in particular,
not spray.
Oh yeah, no. If you spray, you will die if they spray at you. What it does, though, what Botox or botulism toxin does, it does kill the nerves or the muscles in your face or anywhere where you inject it that cause them to wrinkle up, right? So that effectively you're killing parts of your body off to look good, but what else is new? In particular, Grunet Island in Scotland, during a series of extensive tests, was contaminated with anthrax for the next 48 years. Although the UK never offensively used these biological weapons, so we think, it developed. Its program was the first to successfully weaponize a variety of deadly pathogens and bring them into industrial production. When the US entered the war, World War II that is, mounting British pressure for the creation of a similar research program for an allied pooling of resources led to the creation of a large industrial complex at Fort Detrick, Maryland in 1942. And now listen up very carefully. Under the direction of George W. Merck. Ring any bells? Google Merck. M-A-R-C-K. See who that is. The biological and chemical weapons developed during that period were tested at the Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. Soon there were facilities for the mass production of anthrax spores, brucellosis, and botulism toxins, although the war was over before these weapons could be of much operational use. However, the most notorious program of the period was run by the secret Imperial Japanese Army Unit 731 during the war. Based at Pingfan in Manchuria and commanded by Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii. This unit did research on biological weapons, conducted often fatal human experiments on prisoners, and produced biological weapons for combat use. Although the Japanese effort lacked the technological sophistication of the American and British programs, it far outstripped them in its widespread application and indiscriminate brutality. Biological weapons were used against both Chinese soldiers and civilians in several military campaigns. 3 veterans of Unit 731 testified in a 1989 interview to the Asahi Shimbun that they contaminated the Horosteen River with typhoid near the Soviet troops during the Battle of Khalkhin Gol. In 1940, the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force bombed Ningbo and Changde with ceramic bombs full of fleas, carrying the bubonic plague. Many of these operations were ineffective due to inefficient delivery systems, using disease-bearing insects rather than dispersing the agent as a bioaerosol cloud. Nevertheless, some modern Chinese historians estimate that 400,000 Chinese died as a direct result of Japanese field testing and operational use of biological weapons. When the war ended, the U.S. Army quietly, now listen to this, when the war ended, Operation Paperclip except in the East, the U.S. Army quietly enlisted certain members of Noborito in its effort against the communist camp in the early years of the Cold War. The head of Unit 731, Shiro Ishii, was granted immunity from war crimes prosecution in exchange for providing information to the United States on the unit's activities. Allegations were made that a chemical section of a U.S. clandestine unit hidden within Yokosuka Naval Base was operational during the Korean War and then worked on unspecified projects inside the United States from 1955 to 1959 before returning to Japan to enter the private sector. Some of the Unit 731 personnel were imprisoned by the Soviets and may have been a potential source of information on Japanese weaponization. Oh my God, do we have a glorious history here, don't we?
Yeah, completely. So, X10, there was a chemical name for it that I know that I've been Googling since you've been speaking, Meki. And sure. VX. VX. I know there was an X10 chemical. I saw a documentary on it, and VX is terrible. Sarin gas, of course, the strychnine, mercury, the whole bunch of these botulinum. They're all completely terrible, right? And don't use any of them. Don't go near any of them. If there's a container with that written on the side, it's not good. And, but in some cases, people might just simply consider their town drinking water in the same regard. Post-war period, considerable research into BW was undertaken throughout the Cold War era by the US, UK, USSR, and probably other major nations as well, although it is generally believed that such weapons were never used. In Britain, in the 1950s, saw the weaponization of plague, brucellosis, tularemia, and later equine encephalomyelitis and vaccinia viruses. I can't say that word fast. Trial tests at sea were carried out, including Operation Cauldron off Stornoway in 1952. The program was cancelled in 1956 when the British government unilaterally renounced the use of biological and chemical weapons. The United States initiated its weaponization efforts with disease vectors in 1953, focused on plague fleas, triple E mosquitoes, and yellow fever mosquitoes, which are OJ-AP. That'd be, I don't know what that, Asia Pacific maybe, I don't know. However, US medical scientists in occupied Japan undertook extensive research on insect vectors with the assistance of former Unit 731 staff as early as 1946. The United States Army Chemical Corps then initiated a crash program to weaponize anthrax, or just known as N, in the E-61 half-pound hourglass bomblet. Though the program was successful in meeting its development goals, yay, project management, the lack of validation on the ineffectivity of anthrax stalled standardization. The United States Air Force was also unsatisfied with the operational qualities of M114-/US bursting bomblet and labeled it an interim item until the Chemical Corps could deliver a superior weapon. Hear the discussion around it? Well, it wasn't quite good enough. I didn't quite like the spread of it. So, let's just wait. We'll continue to wait. To kill people, right? Around 1950, the Chemical Corps also initiated a program to weaponize tularemia tularemia, or otherwise known as UL. Shortly after the E61/N failed to make standardization, tularemia was standardized in the 3.4-inch M143 bursting spherical bomblet. This was intended for delivery by the MGM-29 Sergeant missile warhead and could produce 50% infection over a 7 square mile or 18 square kilometer area. Although,
now hang on a second.
Go ahead.
Just to mention, so okay. So, how did they know that?
They've tested it.
Keep going.
Completely, right? So they don't just guess at this stuff. And of course, it would be wind-borne too, wind-driven. Although tularemia is treatable by antibiotics, treatment does not shorten the course of the disease. US conscientious observers were used... Objectors, were used as consenting test subjects for tularemia in a program known as Operation Whitecoat. There were also many unpublicized tests carried out in public places with bioagent simulants during the Cold War. In addition to the use of bursting bomblets for creating biological aerosols, the Chemical Corps started investigating aerosol generating bomblets in the 1950s. E99 was the first workable design, but was too complex to be manufactured. By the late 1950s, the 4.5-inch E120 spraying spherical bomblet was developed. A B-47 bomber with a SUU-24/8 dispenser could infect 50% or more of the population of a 16 square mile or 41 square kilometer area with a tularemia with the E120. The E120 was later superseded by a dry type agent. So dry type biologicals resemble talcum powder and can be disseminated as aerosols using gas expulsion devices instead of a burster or complex sprayer. Coming to mind here with our last few minutes, last minute or two, is when they were spraying the people in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, when they were spraying the people on the mountain using helicopters and using the dust coming out of, that was exactly that method.
Yep.
Aerosol, gas propelled dust. Just crazy. But look, I know that there was something that happened in Detroit on the tops of buildings, and it was a secret project, and we might get to that later on. But it was a secret project to disperse an agent in the air on unsuspecting citizens of the US by the US government.
Oh, there's the music. Dune, I've got that link and I'll read it. I'm reading it, and we'll discuss it next week if there's something to it. Thanks, buddy.
No dramas at all. See you next week. Take care. Have a good week. Stay safe. Don't become infected. And also listen to Jer Bear's great show coming up next on Revolution Radio.